Hey, everybody. When this video goes live, I'm going to be at CEX with this guy. And so we thought it'd be really fun to give you an inside look at what we're celebrating at CEX, which in large part is the publication of The Content Entrepreneur, which is a book that we both had quite a lot to do with. So, welcome, Marc Maxhimer. Thank you for joining us on Content Chat today.
I am excited to be here. Thank you for having me. It was definitely a huge project that I am willing to share the joys and some of the struggles. So it
Fantastic.
was a process.
So yesterday we talked a little bit with Joe, who shared, from the thought leadership standpoint and from the new world of self-publishing and how you really have the opportunity, if you're doing this stuff more directly, to keep that owned audience that you've worked so hard to build. But there's a lot of work that goes into doing something like putting together a book with 34 authors. Had you ever done anything like this before?
My background is actually I was an English teacher for 16 years and I taught eighth grade.
Oh,
So I managed, 25, 30 kids in a classroom all the time. The difference here is that I actually had people that could write and write fairly well. They didn't talk back to me, all the things, but it was
we didn't
still
talk back to you? I don't believe that.
well, maybe a couple of you, but they shall remain nameless. So it's definitely a huge thing to sit down in a room. The way this started is Joe had this idea is like, hey, because this community, for those of you that don't know, this community that wrote this book came out of CEX. It's our VIP group. It's CEX. By this point, I think we're all friends, good friends and acquaintances. I know everybody. We go show up every year at CEX. It's a great group. It's a lot of the leaders and movers and shakers in the content entrepreneur world. So you get 35, 40 of those people sit down in a room, and there are a lot of strong opinions about what you should do. But at the same time, nobody wants to step up and be the leader. So Joe was very good. He set up and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. He had the idea. Let's write a book together. Joe's written a bunch of books. A couple of the other people in the group have written books, actually, and a couple of them just recently wrote books. Andy Schiffman, Katie Brinkley. He goes, we together can create a much bigger book than just us individually. So let's come out with the first book, all for content entrepreneurs, explaining what it is we do. So that gave us at least a little bit of direction. When you start this process, if this is something you're thinking about doing, you have to have a little bit of an idea of where you want this to go. If you're the ringleader, if you're the circus master like Joe, you have to know where you're going to go a little bit, and then let it happen organically after that with the group. But if not, you have to have that direction to begin with.
Totally agreed. And I'm not going to lie, Marc, I sat on my hands to make sure that I did not raise my hand and volunteer for
Yeah.
too many things. And I say that as somebody who ended up writing 3 chapters. So for me, that was not volunteering to do too many things.
Yeah. So the other big component of this is, and I didn't originally volunteer to be a project manager. Angela Long
Mhm.
was an amazing project manager. She started the process off. She volunteered for it. She was the perfect person to do it. She is detail oriented, task oriented, and helps keep things on track. Like we would be having meetings and it'd be kind of going this way, but we'd get back on track. I kind of joined the project. I was an author. I signed up to write a chapter about sponsorships, but I kind of joined because we needed a little bit because this was going to be one of the first books published with Tilt Publishing, and it was kind of in coordination with CEX and Joe, and I kind of joined as the liaison to the Tilt, to this and CEX and this group of authors. As I got more involved, I just sort of became an editor and a project manager with Angela. But she deserves most all of the credit because she started the process, did all the stuff, set all the meetings. So if you're thinking about doing this, you have to have somebody who wants to do it because it's a lot of work, and B is good at it. They have to be a good project manager. They've got to keep the train moving on those tracks. You can't get derailed, or it's with 35 people. it is going to get derailed very quickly.
And then they're going to blow up your inbox and your phone with asking you
Yes.
questions of what's going on.
Yes. Yes, definitely. It was an interesting experience, to say the least. So
So, when you kind of look back on the whole process, what do you think is one of the core things that we did right from the start that really made this be a book that really does feel like a cohesive whole versus feeling like a collection of short stories, for example, where when you're doing something like that, every story maybe loosely has a theme, but it's, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's all, part of a cohesive whole versus the book 100% does feel like it is, a really consistent kind of from a messaging and, voice and tone and all that kind of stuff. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah, so that there's two parts. There's two parts to that question, two answers for that question. The first one is that at the very beginning, because we had that direction from Joe about like, this is what we're going to do. We talked in the meeting, and then we kind of divided the book up into sections of like, here's the stuff you need to get started. Here's like and it kind of evolved as we wrote the book, as any book does, as you know.
Yep.
Anytime you're writing, you start out with this, but you end up way over here with something because it just naturally happens when you write. So we kind of had a loose outline, which was good. And is what we allowed people to do is put in what they thought their strong points were, what their expertise was, where they wanted to be in the book, and where it kind of fit. The good part of that is that then people were writing what they knew, which is what you want someone to do, but it allowed them the comfort to be like, and they kind of, then you started to see the gaps. And this may have been your case. Like people are like, oh, I could write about that. I didn't think I could because I thought maybe there was someone better than me, but no one volunteered. But I know that I can write about that. And so that allowed the book to kind of then start to take shape in terms of a true outline of a book. So that's the first thing, is that we set it up to be a guide, like a guide how to be a content entrepreneur. If you just let everybody pick whatever they want to write about, that's when you get the individual stories. The second huge thing is that we had an amazing, I can't say enough about them, amazing editing team. So we put together an editing team. In the end, we sent it to a professional copy editor before publishing. But ahead of time, we set up an editing team. Angela and myself, Robert Wurtzel and Diane Burley. Marc Hicks joined us at the beginning, and then he had some outside obligations and kind of bowed out after the first step of the process. But he was instrumental as well in setting up. And we had a whole page in the spreadsheet and in a document of like, here is kind of the things about the book, the tone, how you want to write about it. We want it to be actionable steps. So we set a kind of like a list of guidelines that every chapter needed to have. That helped because then when the first drafts came through, we were able to go back and say, hey, you need to change it from this to this. It needs to be action. We were big on, we want actionable steps. So that helped guide people, because a lot of them just sort of started writing about theoretical and theory. And we're like, no. We want action. We want here, do this first. Yeah, we want it to be practical. Exactly. And then once we started getting the final drafts in, that's when our editing team, we met every Wednesday night for the entire summer at about 5-6 o'clock after we were all done with work. And we met for like an hour and a half, talked, worked through things. It was awesome because we really got to, Robert, if you don't know Robert, his day job is, in addition to being a writer, is he has a farm. So we heard weekly stories about his cows, and I actually got to look forward to it. Like, the cows got out, like you're on pins and needles waiting for the cow story every week. And then we got down to business, and that was in those meetings we really helped flush out, like, hey, we would ask each other, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this section? Do we need to cut it? And I think that is really the true testament of having that core editing team that helps provide that cohesiveness. And we were very clear with all the authors that you submitted your work, but it's going to go through us as the editing, and it's going to go through a copy editor. So what you submitted and what's actually published may not look the same. But as Robert said, I don't know why anyone's going to complain. We're going to make them sound better.
Totally.
The core tenets were there. And we had to change some of the authors' writing just because of their writing style. and we kept their voice, but we wanted it to fit the overall to make it cohesive with the whole book, like you were talking about. So it definitely was a lot of work and a lot of you definitely have to pay attention to it if you're doing a project like this, because if not, exactly like you said, it's going to sound like a disjointed short story book of, whatever. And those have their place. And if that's what you set out to do, that's fine. But if you want to write a book like this, you need to have that cohesiveness.
I think it was really smart that we did the process of managing, fleshing out the table of contents in a Google Sheet, because it allowed, as you mentioned, that framework of, okay, we're going to do the, beginning, middle, and, later stage of the content entrepreneur journey. And what are the things, the topics at the different stages, and then allowed people to put in, kind of their takes on it, because it meant that we got some sections with a lot more nuanced and robust content than we would have if we just were like, okay, you're going to sign up to do this entire chapter. Because I know there are certain cases where I signed up to do, an element of a chapter. So it's like, well, I just have 1,000 words to talk in my chapter, my, component here, because somebody else is going to tackle a different part of it. That's something that I'm not as, excited about talking about, but that they were. And I think that is really something that the format of the spreadsheet and having that kind of a process really helped do, because otherwise no one's going to say, I know that, here in this outline document that so-and-so is tagged for this, but I think I could add on to it. There's something about when you have a list that's, in bullets or something, you're not going to do that. But when it's a spreadsheet and it's got extra rows and stuff, there's just something psychologically about that that makes people collaborate, I think.
Yes, I love Google. I think it's great because people can see it in real time. People make changes, then you're not sending back and forth. You need a collaborative document to do a project like this. The fun part is that I think that you, as one of the authors, saw at least 2 or 3 versions of the spreadsheets. By the end, what we started with and what we ended with, maybe the first 2 chapters were the same in the same spot, but after that, but that was the beauty of having it all laid out. One of the things is we didn't have a whole chapter on social media.
Mm-hmm.
It was, the tilt, we're big on don't build on rented land. So,
Yep.
but in this day and age, you have to leverage social media. And that's one of the things we talked about, is leveraging social media to move them to your channels, your own
Yep.
channels. And we realized there's a lot of experts in social media in this group. So we pulled those out of where they were, made their own little section, made a whole little section of them. And I think it worked out even better, because now someone can be like, oh, they can go right to the social media section. There's the getting started part, which is the basics that I think a lot of us don't even think about, like setting up a website, talking about your brand. Angela wrote a great chapter about a brand house and a brand, the foundation and the wall.
Yep.
And that's stuff that I think a lot of people don't think about. And that's what having this big group brought to the table, is you got all the different viewpoints and people that have different experiences. And like you said, we had two people write a chapter together. I was a little worried how that was going to go. It worked out. They were friends, so I was safe. It was funny. I would get an email from one saying, well, blah, 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 and they were just messing with each other, but it provided me some humor. And then we had a couple other people that were like, I wrote about this. I don't really think it fits anywhere, but I want to be a part of it. And so we were able to take that and make it like an addition to one of the chapters, because it fit.
Yep.
The one thing Joe was very clear about, and from the beginning, was we sat in the room at CEX, and you probably remember him saying this. He was very clear, like, just because you're in the meeting doesn't mean that all of you are going to be in the book.
Yep.
We still, if we're all putting our names on this, we wanted to produce something that was high quality, very, very well defined what the steps were, and finished, and worthy of all of our names being on the book.
Yep.
I think we accomplished that and went above it. And the nice part is that we were able, the chapters that we cut were actually people that had written multiple chapters. And so it was much easier. And when I sent the email, hey, we're going to cut this chapter, everybody was like, okay, that's fine. Like, having to send an email to one person, we had a couple people who we were able to fit in. We asked when we went back and asked for rewrites, and gave a bunch of, you know, a kind of what we needed and what we looked for. And because we're all content specialists and professionals in this world, I think they just needed that guidance. And so they
Yeah.
were able to, so don't, if you're doing a project like this, don't be scared to like say, this is the caliber of book we're producing. If you can give them the chance, you have to give them the chance to rewrite it, because they're probably going to surprise you. A couple of the chapters that came in were like, I don't know about this. And then we went back, gave them the guidance, and it came through. And sometimes I think people just need that guidance, especially if they're first-time authors. A lot of people in this book are first-time authors. I write for the Tilt, but this is my first time published in a book. I was a little intimidated when I sat down. I went through numerous drafts of my own chapter and then gave it to Robert. And like, I'm on the editing team, so I gotta listen to Robert to tear apart my chapter, but it worked out in the end. So don't be scared to, if you're not the editor, if you're doing a project like this, find somebody who is an editor and the project manager that's not scared to give people the feedback, but do it in a constructive way. Like, hey, we want you involved. You need to do this, this, and this. Let us know. We're willing to work through this with you. And I know that both Diane and Robert met with a couple authors, like in a call like this, and helped them work through the writing. And the end result was wonderful. I mean, the difference between the first chapter, the first draft we got, and what's in the book is night and day in some cases. And it's where the whole book is better for it.
I love that. So of course, that's the good part that went really well. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, what is something that you learned you guys maybe would have wanted to have done differently and will do differently if you do another one of these big projects?
I would define, there's numerous things. I would define what you want the end product to be a little better at the beginning. And I know that's tough because it organically takes it's on a life of its own. As a writer, we all know that, like I said, but we weren't clear that we wanted actionable steps from the beginning. And in hindsight, I actually felt bad having to go back and tell people, listen, you put a ton of work in this, and it's really good, and you might want to save it for your own book, but it's not what we're looking for. And so I wish that we would have defined things a little bit better from the beginning to give people more like structure on what they needed to do, so that they didn't waste their time writing, and that they didn't feel like we didn't want what they had. We did want what they had. We wanted their content just in a little bit different way. The other big thing that's a struggle, and it wasn't really that it didn't go well. I think this is a struggle when you're working with 35 people who most of them are solo entrepreneurs, or they own a small business. We know what this life is like. You work your butt off all the time. And this was an extra, and they all wanted to do it. But the
deadline sneaks up on you.
Deadlines creep up very fast. And this is something I've always done, and I did when I was a teacher. If you want something on Friday, you tell them the previous Thursday, because it's going to be at least Wednesday or Thursday of the next week till you get it. And there were a couple times where we had to say, if we don't have this in 3 days, it's out, because we needed to meet a deadline of our own, or with Tilt Publishing for layout and that kind of thing, especially on the rewrites. And the other thing that I have learned, and I mean, this kind of goes, don't put too many things in one email, because if you load it with information, they're only going to read the first two. So if you do load it with information, make sure the two things you want are the first two things, because we would do that. We would send a big email, and then we would get 20 emails back asking us a question. And I'm like, it was in the email. So we started shortening up our emails. And you just have to be prepared that you're working with 35 people. Like, things are going to come up. They're going to have different ideas. Interpretations are going to be different. And you have to be a little bit flexible, and not very rigid, which is tough for someone who is very detail oriented and wants to keep the train moving. There's times when you got to kind of, be willing to do the little detour. And it helps if you have someone in your group that's personable. And I think it's because I was the liaison with Tilt and worked with Joe. I often would get the task of sending emails to people that I don't think anybody else wanted to send, which I'm fine. I embraced the role, and it worked out. But it definitely is a long process. That's the biggest thing, that we had all kinds of deadlines. I'm sure you remember. We were like, we're going to be done by August. We're going to publish in October. We're going to publish in January. And as anyone that's watching this knows, we just published last week. So it definitely
It's
is
like
much.
launching a website. That's about the trajectory. It's always 6 months later than you
It
think.
and I just and when you think you're done, you're not done. You have 3 more months of work. 3 more months of work. Yeah, like we had a draft, and I read the draft. Joe read the draft. He and I met, and we both kind of looked at each other and were like, "This isn't it." And we didn't really know. We didn't have any. It wasn't anyone in particular. It was just after we read the book in entirety. Because that's the other thing is when you're reading chapter by chapter and editing and piecemeal,
Yep.
you don't really get that feeling of what the whole book is and get that whole feeling. And then when we sat down and read it from start to finish, we both were like, this it's almost there, but it's not there. This isn't it. We're not publishing this. So then we had to sit down and we worked with the editing team and talked about what else it needed. And it came out that it was mostly we needed actionable steps.
Yep.
And practical advice, things that someone could pick up this book, follow it, and in 18 months have a business that they can probably support themselves on, is what our goal was. It sounds easy now that I say it after we've been through the process, but I wish I would have had that statement when we started.
But that is something I did think about is, what would it have made it easier for me as a writer as part of the project? And I think if we'd had like a really nicely fleshed out reader profile, so, reminding us of the biggest challenges, goals and stumbling blocks for the person who is going to be the, one picking up this book, I think that probably would have been a help. But the other would have been just like having that style guide where you could have had some of those things. I'm an actionable kind of writer. I'm very practical. I do lots of step-by-step kinds of articles. And when I do a presentation, people always come out of a presentation I've given with oh my gosh, she gave me a template and told me how to use it. I'm that person because I really like to share what I've learned and teach. But I also, like you've been to a lot of conferences, I'm sure, where you sit in a session and you're like, well, that was an interesting session where we learned all about the speaker. And I don't know how I can apply anything that I just heard because I don't have $1 million. And, it's not that it wasn't interesting or inspiring or valuable, but you didn't get that, thing that you could practically apply. You got more of like the fodder and the fertilizer for your own, innovation, but you didn't necessarily get a blueprint.
I think that is an excellent point because we did get some of that because it's tough. We have all these solo entrepreneurs, small business owners that have, social media agencies, they talk about sponsorships, they talk about all the things. And so it's hard when that's your daily life to not talk about what you do and about you and your business. And we wanted some of that in there. I mean, we talked about the tilt, we talked about, stuff, but we had to make sure to try and pull back on what you were talking about. Like, we don't want so much about you. We want your knowledge. We don't want what you're doing, which is weird because we do want what you're doing, but we want it in steps that we can follow. It's a lot tougher than I think people realize. And you as a speaker and as a writer know that it takes a lot. For me personally, it was very tough because I came from being an English teacher, where my job was, and I got a master's degree. My whole world was academic writing.
Yeah.
And as you know, academic writing is vastly different than the writing you do for content and blogs and newsletters and even this book. And so I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and it's taken me that long to begin to feel comfortable writing like this. And I think that a lot of people that was part of the problem with it. But it's, that's why they call them drafts, and that's why you get to go through them and why you have an editing team. But it was definitely a process. And you kind of feel bad because you almost feel like it's hard not to feel bad when you're like, hey, stop talking about you so much and talk about what you're doing, but not talk about you. It's tough.
And honestly, the more familiar you are with the topic, the harder it is to put yourself in the shoes of that person who's just hearing it for the first time.
Yeah, I agree. And I really think that like, so Joe had this idea, he and I talked about it, and it's like you wanted, like, you wished you would have had more of a style guide and more of like what the book was about. I really think Joe and I knew that in our heads, but this is what we do every day. We're teaching content entrepreneurs how to be content entrepreneurs. So we just, I don't, not really assumed it, just, we didn't think to write it down. And so that's the thing. And to your point, especially, that's, take a step back, look at what the true purpose is. If you're teaching someone from the beginning. Or if you're writing a book for the advanced user, that's fine. Then make sure that you don't need to go through all the beginning stuff. If it's for an advanced user, you don't need to do the beginning stuff, because that's going to turn off the audience it's intended for. But if it's for a true beginner, you got to start at the beginning with the basics. And if you think that everybody knows those, everybody doesn't know those. Like, so you got to do it.
Right? Like for me, my AI chapter was the easiest one to do that way, because everyone I'm talking to about, my approach for using AI for repurposing content, everyone is pretty much a beginner. So I automatically do that. But on the flip side, I had to rewrite my brand voice chapter, because I have been speaking about and writing about and coaching and all of that kind of stuff around how you develop that documented brand voice forever. But I primarily do this with organizations that already have a sense of who they want their brand to be. So for me, this was my first time actually really trying to condense thinking about the importance of brand voice for an audience, for somebody who probably they never even thought about what is a brand voice and why would I want one. So it was a completely different approach. Yet I still wanted to walk people through the 5 steps because they're so important, but it was a completely different way, different vocabulary, etc., to approach it in order to make it be useful for somebody who hasn't spent the last 15 years doing content marketing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great example of like people that you've been doing it, like you said, and you're just so used to, especially if you do, like you said, the presentations. And we had numerous of those people that they're professionals, they're speaker, they go out to do, they do presentations all the time. They're in B2B type situations and working with enterprise to talk about like data or brand voice or content marketing. And you forget what it's like for the beginners and the newbies. The other thing, and what you were talking about is made me think of, is that there were a lot of chapters, and I don't remember if it was yours, but there was a lot of chapters that were really, really long, because these are the experts in the field in this content area. And so they wanted to tell you all of it. And so we had to, hey, focus, help, narrow the focus down and make sure that you are talking about one specific thing. Each chapter is its own thing. You don't need to tell us the history of content marketing and all the ins and outs of content marketing in one chapter.
Totally.
So that was something else that would have been probably good to put in that document at the beginning. So if anyone's watching this, take all the things that I said would have been good to say at the beginning and do them at the beginning, because it's going to help your process. Between Eric and I, we pretty much have what you should do at the beginning covered.
Well, I'd love to also hear kind of your perspective on, what do you think I feel like this book, because it does have so many different people involved with it, it does feel like it is kind of a masterclass in the true sense, not masterclass in the, it's really a 1-hour webinar somebody wants to charge you $1,000 for.
Right.
I would love to hear like your perspective around, the value of doing a project like this, because I think it is very different than just being a person going out and writing a book and maybe interviewing a few people and including their thoughts. This does seem like a completely different kind of project from that standpoint, as far as where you end up.
I really think that the benefit, so as we've talked about, it's a lot of work and it's crazy to get 30 adults who are full-time professionals to do something on a deadline. But the benefit of having all of these experts come together to write a book, like for your chapter, for example, on the brand voice, yeah, it's something that needs to be included. But I probably, for someone that's just starting out, wouldn't have been thought to include that. But after reading it, it needed to be there. And so I think those are the examples that having a group project like this that can really make the project and the book better, because you have all these different viewpoints that are coming in and providing, if you tried to put all of us into a class and charge money to teach it, no one could afford it, because there's all these people who are experts. And now we've just given you our expertise in a chapter of a book. And then there's 30 other people that are experts in what they do. Brian Piper does data. I mean, he's amazing at data and all that. You did AI. Pamela Muldoon did stuff about audio and marketing. I mean, and she's doing our narration for the voiceover. That was the other great thing about this project. The editors and the voiceover and the design were all from the group. So it was a total group project. But you have all those people coming, and I think I think the amount of work that it takes scares people off from doing this. But I think that more communities could really show how great their community is. And I think community leaders should consider doing a group project like this, because then it shows, hey, I mean, if nothing else, it's a great marketing tool of, hey, this is my community. Look what we produced. You want to be a part of this because these are the minds that are in here.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, then you get to share that with all the rest of the world. And my hope is that people pick this book up that are thinking about maybe doing this. In fact, I have a couple friends, because as a teacher, I've got a couple of teacher friends that are like, I want to leave. You left. And I was like, hey, I'm going to send them the book and be like, this. Plus, we all get the question, what is it that you do? I don't understand. So I'm giving this book to my parents. They are going to read it. And I'll be like, this is how I market it to all my friends. I'm like, if you want to know what I do all day, read this book. This is what I do. But I think that's what my hope is that somebody picks this book up who is thinking about starting or has started, and they realized, whoa, this is way harder than I thought. I don't know what I'm doing. And that they can pick this book up and be like, okay, and almost like a checklist. Boom, I've got the website. Boom, I've got the legal stuff. Boom, I've got the brand voice. Now, and then, because as the book goes on, then you start getting into the social media, then you get into the digital products. And because like my chapter about sponsorships is not something that you need within the first little while. You need to focus on the other things first. And that's what I love about how we set the book up with all the experts, is that we really went down through, and you get the best advice from the best people. That's the best way to put it.
Marc, I feel like we probably are going to need to do a follow-up that is a workbook that actually has kind of like the passion planner kind of approach, where you have the quarter by quarter of your journey that really helps, give people who need the structure or who need the accountability kind of person in their life. I think that's going to have to be a follow-up to this.
You are not the first person to suggest that. I'm not entirely sure I'm ready to take on another group project right now.
You're not going to raise your hand for that?
Yeah, I suspect that if it happens, I'll be involved somehow. But I could see that happening down the road, maybe a little bit once the book is launched. Once we see if the need is there, it wouldn't be hard to do. It would really just be, we've got the content, we're just kind of repurposing it. And exactly. We happen to know somebody, wink, wink, who's pretty good at that. So maybe we can use your AI chapter. We could use the AI chapter about repurposing content to repurpose the content. There we go.
We've solved it. We probably could, actually.
Yeah, I think so. We've solved it. Unfortunately, people are going to watch this and be like, okay, I think Marc and Erika just volunteered.
Oh, no. Well, if that happens, it happens, and we'll make AI be our intern, and it'll be fine.
Oh, too funny.
So, Marc, before I let you go from the special edition of Content Chat, what is kind of the one big takeaway or piece of advice you have for somebody who is considering getting involved with this kind of a project?
One of the biggest, I got a couple, about probably three pieces of actionable advice. That's what we talked about.
Excellent.
One is you have to, if you learn nothing else from this half hour of listening to us, really define what you want the end product to be at the beginning, along with some style guides, so that people have that structure to work within, but still give them the chance to show their expertise and find other areas that they know that they can write about, that they didn't think they could write about. So that's the first thing, is really set it up well at the beginning. Learn from us. We didn't know what we didn't know, and now we know it. Now we're telling you. The second one is it's going to take longer than you thought, but and it's going to be more work than you thought, but the end product is way worth the process. It's worth it, and I can't express that enough. Like, after I read the book and then I saw the final cover, I was like, man, I'm an author in this book with all of these other experts, these people, these names I never thought I'd be beside. I helped make this book. It was a really good feeling. And it may sound cheesy, but it totally is. And I got that feeling from all of the other authors as they marketed it. Plus, it was great. You've got 30 marketers involved in marketing your book, in the book for you. And then the final thing, and really this is something we did at the beginning, it could be a nightmare. Make sure that the profits go towards something, not the authors, because it prevents so many issues. We chose a foundation. We're going with the Orange Effect Foundation to help children with speech issues and speech learning. If you do it with your community, you could have the money go into the community on something for the community. Like, that way nobody gets it. The whole community benefits, and everybody's fine with that. I just think that, and it wasn't an issue for us because we set it up that way from the beginning, but you have to consider what you're going to do with the profits, because you can't split it up amongst the people. It's a nightmare. You'd have to have all kinds of contracts signed. It's not happening. Plus, then the goal of the book is to help people. And that's it, because you're helping people with the charity, you're helping people with the content, and it becomes a true community project, and people want to do their best to help other people. And that's what I love about our community and this whole world of content entrepreneurs, is they all want to help each other. And I think this book exemplifies that.
I love that. I think those are really fantastic takeaways. And I especially agree with your final point there, because, knowing that we were doing this for the Orange Effect Foundation, it really did make it that much more meaningful, because we knew that it wasn't just about us trying to, make a few extra dollars. It was about us trying to make a difference.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
that definitely felt great. Well, Marc, if folks want to find more from you, in addition to, reading The Tilt and following all things Tilt related, where should they find you? Are you on LinkedIn? Do you have a website?
The best place is LinkedIn, or just reach out to me. I'm always willing to say hi, work with you on something. If you have a question about anything, the book, publishing, the Tilt, CEX, anything, Marc@thetilt.com is the best way, or find me on LinkedIn and connect. I'd love to connect with everybody. If you have more questions for me about the community project, I am always willing to help answer questions, or jump on a call or whatever. And for those of you that aren't at CEX, I don't know why you're not there. You should be there with Erika and I right now. So come next year. It's a good time. You get a lot, and you make a lot of good friends and networking connections. So.
And I couldn't agree more with that. So thank you again for being our guest, and
thank you for having me.
Everyone else, I'm going to get back into the fun at CEX, and hope to see you there next year as well. And if not, well, at least I'll see you next week here on Content Chat.
All right. Thank you very much, Erika. Bye.